Hi, and thank you so much for joining me for the final chapter of Royal Secrets. No, I don't want it to go. I don't want it to end. It's been so entertaining. Now, this is chapter 9, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So this is a chapter primarily about the Queen Mother, and it kicks off with a really interesting paragraph. If by any chance the Queen Mother happened to say in the hearing of William, her steward, which is, of course, Backstairs Billy, and he's very famous. I've done a video on him. I've actually did a review of the book, Backstairs Billy. Also, there was a West End play, wasn't there, about Backstairs Billy last year. What an unpleasant colour this room is, so if she was to say that. The chances are that he would pass on the word and staff would stay up all night to repaint the offending walls a colour nearer her taste. The Queen Mother's staff absolutely adored her. When she turned 84 in August 1984, she still undertook hundreds of engagements a year and never showed a trace of boredom. And she didn't. She was always this happy, fluffy, feathery, smiley, wondrous figure. Now, he goes on to describe William, and I think he quite liked him. William, her devoted steward, has been with her for 30 years. He's a handsome, courteous man and perfect for the job. She relies on him enormously. He runs the house for her and even buys her Christmas presents for her. I didn't know that Backstairs Billy actually purchased all the Christmas presents for the Queen Mum. That's quite amazing. She also employs the only female gardener in the royal service, a positive lady called Binny, whose pride and joy is the perfect lawn at Clarence House, the Queen Mother's London home. Now, Binny, if you actually step on her grass, she will run up to you, even if you're the then Prince Charles, and swear at you and tell you to get off her grass. She even once shouted at Princess Alexandra, "Get off my bloody lawn!" Isn't that hilarious? Now, one of the Queen Mother's other houses is Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park. And of course, we know who lives there now, don't we? Prince Andrew and Fergie. And at one time, Beatrice and Eugenie, but not anymore. They've actually fled the nest. But yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because evidently it's quite a grand, very, very grand home, very beautiful. But obviously it does need a lot of upkeep. And I suppose that it may have been let to run down a little bit since the Queen Mother's time. She loved to spend money, the Queen Mother. She wasn't a penny pincher like our last chapter about the other royals. She loved to spend money even she didn't have. Because after she died, she'd actually racked up this huge overdraft, which the Queen had to clear. But we've got to hear about her separate staff. And one of these members of separate staff was her under-butler, old James Frost, who had been in service forever. People used to say, "How long have you worked for royalty, James?" And he would answer, "I've boiled water for 5 queens." The Queen Mother rather likes her staff to be characters, and there was another footman that used to have every Tuesday afternoon off. And Stephen Barry says that's because he used to attend the Inglefield Women's Institute meeting. He was the only male, and the reason why they used to go on Tuesday afternoons was they used to do embroidery, and evidently this footman used to do the most exquisite embroidery. Now, for many years, the Queen Mother was looked after by 2 dressers, and Stephen Barry said they sounded like a musical act because their surnames were Field and Suckling, and the Queen Mother used to refer to them as Field and Suckling, and they used to be followed around by this little dachshund that was called Pippin. Now, Pippin used to be Princess Margaret's dog, but as we heard in previous chapters, Princess Margaret wasn't really a doggy person, and she mainly had dogs just for sort of performative reasons, for photo shoots, things like that. So Pippin eventually just sort of became Field and Suckling's little dresser's dog and used to follow them around everywhere. Suckling is an absolute clone of the Queen Mother, having modelled herself upon her mistress. And come to think of it, at times she can even be rather grander than her mistress. Field is better remembered for being very greedy. She adored her food and drink and was always waiting for the next meal. Field was coming down the aircraft steps on a royal tour, and she was following her mistress and carrying the royal hat box when unfortunately the catch of this came undone and a bottle of gin fell out, landing on the tarmac to be written off, and Field was desolate. So I think Stephen Barry's trying to imply that Field liked a dookie dar or two. Or maybe it was for the Queen Mum. I mean, the Queen Mum loved gin. It got smashed on the tarmac, so the Queen Mother didn't get any when she got ready that night, did she? Field used to travel with her more often than Suckling, but William, her steward, goes with her everywhere. He is indispensable. As far as she's concerned, in the summer of 1983, he broke his arm and couldn't go to Balmoral for the holidays, and he was thrilled to receive a 3-page letter from the Queen Mother, written on both sides of the page, wishing him well and saying, "Why don't you come up to Scotland, because the fresh air will do you good?" And he did. They were really great friends, really, weren't they? And they also said that the Queen Mother was a great favourite of her chef, because she used to love seeing her chef every day and would go through the menu book properly. She loved asparagus and lobster. She also, with some wheedling, had chosen something enormously expensive like strawberries in December, and she'd say to her chef, "Oh, it's just a little treat, Michael." And they'd give in. But one thing that could send her staff into a frenzy is that she could never make up her mind where she wanted to eat lunch. So she'd look outside the window and she'd say, "Oh, it looks like a lovely day. I think I'll eat lunch outside." So they'd, set up, and it would be all silver service. It wouldn't be, just a card table or something. It'd be all set up beautifully in the garden for her. And then she'd go out there and be sitting ready for luncheon, and then she'd say, "Oh, it's a bit chilly. I've changed my mind. I think I might go inside to the dining room." So they'd have to carry everything back. And this would be almost a daily event because she couldn't make up her mind. Now, of course, we know that the then Prince Charles just absolutely adored his grandmother. And he says here, the Prince loves getting away from the formality of Balmoral and into what he calls the coziness of his grandmother's house. Burke Hall is lovely. The Queen Mother houses her fine collection of grandfather long case clocks in the big dining room, and the homely sound of their chimes punctuates the day. What impressed me about her was that she came to greet me. Indeed, when we left, she asked if everything had been all right. The Queen Mother keeps up many of the old ways from the old days, and she lived in rather grand style. And at Clarence House, she had a suite of officers for her household who were very close to her, so much so that it was usual for them to join her for meals when she was alone. That is something that rarely happens at Buckingham Palace. But then up the road is much stuffier than the Queen Mother's establishment. So isn't that interesting? She loved really mixing with her staff. Maybe she's a little bit lonely, I don't know. Or maybe she just loved having a good time and chatting to people. And she had a lot of friends. I mean, she had a lot of friends that used to come around for dinners and lunches. And she was always gadding about and going out and seeing people and stuff. So probably not lonely. She probably just liked her staff. Her tastes in entertainment are Catholic, and that's a bit of an insult. I don't know if it's an insult. I'll read on. And her husband, the late King, loved a bawdy North Country comedian called George Formby. Oh, I've read that before. If you look up on YouTube, you can actually see really old clips of George Formby. I think there's one at a Royal Command performance. Formby and his wife Beryl were frequently invited to the palace to entertain, and that was because also King George VI really loved him as well. One evening, the couple was leaving when Beryl fell over a rug. Solicitous as ever, the Queen Mother picked her up, and Beryl Formby said cheerfully, "Don't worry, Mum. Where I come from, it's good luck. It means we'll be asked back." "Oh, really?" said Queen Elizabeth. "Well, you know where we live." She was pretty good with the banter, with the repartee, wasn't she? When she dressed, no one could look more like a queen. For her, the crinoline had never gone out of fashion, and she's been described affectionately by her subjects as a cross between a Christmas tree, Nellie Wallace, an old-time music hall star, and the Cockney Pearly Queen. When the Queen Mother has a dress made, she asks for an extra yard of the material, and Ivy runs up these rather strange, enormous matching handbags. One of the perks she gives her senior staff is to let them bring their families to Clarence's house when she's going out dressed to the nines for some official function, and then all the mums and the aunties can line the upstairs staircases. And as she would descend the stairs and go out the front door, she would turn around and give a wave to them all and they'd clap her. I love the sound of the Queen Mum. I think she sounds so much fun. She sounds like such a hoot. Now, the Queen used to throw the most generous Gillies ball every summer at Balmoral, and she always had the same band, Jack Sinclair, and it played year after year after year. Now, the Queen Mother didn't like change, so whether she really liked the band or not, she wasn't going to change the band because she didn't like change. Well, Jack Sinclair reminded William, backstairs Billy, that Her Majesty, tell Her Majesty that this is my 30th year playing for this Gillies ball. And William assured him that he would tell the Queen Mother. So at the end of the night, it was customary for the Queen Mother to go up to the band to thank them and say her goodbyes and presumably say, see you next year. And Mr. Sinclair was sort of readied himself because he was expecting some sort of present for the 30 year to mark the 30 years of playing for this ball. And she goes up to him and says, thank you so much, Mr. Sinclair. You won't mind playing on to the end, will you? And he always says, of course not, ma'am. Now, this particular year, he said his piece and waited because he was expecting a pair of cufflinks. And nothing came, so he said, do you know, Your Majesty, this is my 30th year playing for you? And she said, really? Giving him a gentle smile and nothing else. How time flies. To think that next year will be your 31st. And off she sailed. Now, he did say that whenever the Queen and Princess Margaret ever came over for lunch, and it wasn't very often, but during summer they would come over, they used to have a really good time. And it wasn't unknown for the Queen to sort of live it up and relax a little bit with her sister and her mum. But this particular day, she said, do you know, I think I shall have another glass of wine. And the Queen Mother said, should you, Lilibet, dear? You do have to reign all afternoon. And another funny thing is about this open carriage, and the Queen Mother was sharing it at this big agricultural show with Sir Dudley Forward, the honorary director. And he was panicking because you know how the Queen Mother used to wear all those big sort of feathery hats? Well, he was panicking because it looked like it was going to blow off. And in the end, he just couldn't stand the suspense and he put his hand on top of the hat to stop it from blowing off, anchoring it to her head. And the Queen Mother was charmed. Oh, Sir Dudley, she said, in a more gracious age, I would have made you my comptroller of hats. She is gorgeous. She is gorgeous. The Queen Mother must be the only guest who need not consult the table plan whenever there was any official engagement at the palace. Where she is placed is immediately obvious. She always sits in her own special chair, a fine carver with arms. She has a footstool placed underneath and her own private thermos flask full of ice, ready to cool her champagne. Her champagne at the end of the meal is one of her little treats. Now, it's said, this is interesting, that King George V, who was actually her father-in-law, was a real stickler for punctuality, and no one could ever get away with being late for any occasion. But when his new daughter-in-law joined the royal family and married King George VI, she was late for a luncheon, and she arrived, and she was only like a few minutes late, but she was really, really in a panic, and she arrived flustered and anxious. But King George V said gallantly, no, 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 you're not late, my dear. It is we who are too early. Those at the table couldn't believe their ears. So he really loved the Queen Mother. Well, it's Queen Elizabeth, but he really loved the Queen Mother. So, you know, he had a soft spot for his daughter-in-law. Now, she was the most wonderful person in the world in Prince Charles's eyes. She and his great-uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, were the greatest influences on him. Lord Louis for advice and the Queen Mother for sheer love. And he goes on to say that when then Prince Charles was a little boy, that, you know, the Queen Mother used to actually bathe him, used to be really involved in his care and cuddle him a lot and loved him a lot. And when he was 5, the Queen Mother actually bought him his own set of gardening tools. And with him, it took. It sure did, didn't it? Now that he has his own home, Highgrove, he loves pottering around. Well, we know that, don't we? And it seems that we can thank the Queen Mother for that. The Queen Mother had Prince Charles with her at Berkehall many times during his childhood, when the Queen and the Duke were on royal tours, and when he went up to school at Gordonston and was so unhappy. It was to his granny he turned. He had told me that he planned to run away to Berkehall. I was going to hide in the woods, but instead he actually wrote to his grandmother and told her how desperately unhappy he was, and she actually dropped everything and went straight up to Gordonston and actually visited him and made sure he was all right and assured him that the holidays weren't very far away. So they said that she indulged him and loved him, but she was also very strict with him, and she was also very quick always to remind him of what was expected and what was his duty. Now, there was a special service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral, and she was deliberately to upstage Queen Elizabeth II because by a special decree by her daughter, for the first time since she'd become queen in 1952, she took a back seat to her mother. And that's what the day was. After the service at St. Paul's, the Queen turned to her and asked, "Well, Mummy, did you enjoy that?" "Oh, so much, dear," said the Queen Mother. "Now I feel as if I can go on to be 100. And then the Queen said, "In that case, I think you'll have to get Charles to send the telegram. I doubt I'll be around." Now, when the Queen Mother eventually appears on the balcony, they have to give her small little steps because otherwise she can't be seen above the geraniums. And it was a tradition always for her birthday that at 2:30 p.m, the large gates of Clarence House are opened and the Queen Mother, accompanied by her daughters and any grandchildren who happen to be in London, come onto the sidewalk to acknowledge the crowds and receive flowers. Then they all smile and wave and then go back. Her 82nd birthday was particularly important because she shared it with Prince William, who was christened that day. Although she was born in the reign of Queen Victoria, there is little that is stuffy about the Queen Mother. She has a passion for racing, and everyone is aware that she has a string of racehorses. She reads the Sporting Life magazine avidly, and when she's in Canada, she'll give one of the royal aides £1 or £2 to put on a horse. Now, I'm sure she bet in London, but Stephen Barry's being very discreet. If it loses, the subject is never mentioned again. If it wins, he has instructions to give the money, the winnings, to the nearest children's hospital. Another aspect of her character that makes her loved is that she's very careful not to embarrass people, and he really noticed that about her. And he tells a story about the royal detective, and he'd been waiting for the Queen Mother because she'd been at a lunch, and he was in the kitchen of this grand house, and they'd offered him a few drinks, and he'd had a couple of drinks. Anyway, he was probably genuinely tired anyway, and in the car on the way home, he sort of fell asleep in the front seat. And the car pulled up because there was a hold-up, roadworks or something, so it pulled up. And the detective woke up because he sensed the car coming to a stop, and it was his job to jump out and open the door so she could, exit and go into Clarence House. Well, he thought, oh, we're here. So he jumped out. They were in the middle of an intersection, and he opened up the door. And the Queen Mum said, "Shouldn't we go a little further to Royal Lodge, perhaps?" Desperately embarrassed, he shut the Queen's Mother's door and shot back into the car. She never said another word. He told the story himself. So, she was very careful about actually embarrassing people, which is really loved. And he finishes up with this little snippet. It is said that when the Queen Mother was only a small girl, she wrote in an autograph book that her favourite pastime was making friends. She has done that all her life. This again is history, long before my time at the palace, and I think it's worth repeating here. After the king died, she was left a widow at the age of 52. That was actually quite young, wasn't it? She said to the British nation of her husband, "He loved you all, every one of you." That was the pledge he took at his coronation. Now I am left to do what I can do to honour that pledge without him. That pledge she has honoured magnificently. So we can tell that Stephen Barry just absolutely adored the Queen Mother, because he finished his final paragraph was that very moving tribute to the Queen Mother. So that's the end of our book. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to have a few weeks break of books before I start on Royal Service, because, it does sort of make my week rather busy. So I'm going to have a couple of weeks where I'm just going to do Gossip Before Bed and maybe a snarky snippet and take it a little bit easier for a few weeks. And then I will be back all invigorated with Royal Service, the next Stephen Barry book. Now, it's actually his first book, but it's the next one for us. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye.